and a lot of your listeners may even be experiencing this as they listen to us talk, is like, why does this matter? Like, a real man shouldn't even care what he looks like. He shouldn't care about how his clothing communicates to other people or anything else. Like, just be a good man and just dress in XYZ basic clothing, and that's all that matters. And that's historically inaccurate, and not the when you zoom out from our little like 20th century Western culture bubble, 20th, 21st, and you look at any other culture at any other point in history, men have always used their appearance and have always cared deeply about appearance.
Hello, and welcome to the Will Spencer Podcast. This is a weekly interview show where I sit down and talk with authors, thought leaders, and influencers who help us understand our changing world. New episodes release every week. My guest this week is Tanner Guzy. Tanner is a men's style coach and the author of The Appearance of Power, a book helping high-achieving men align their external appearance with their internal identity. As a single father of 7, Tanner has successfully run his own 7-figure business for 8 years, while building an impressive list of physical accomplishments, including completing a half Ironman, earning multiple Jiu-Jitsu tournament medals, and conquering Spartan races. Over the past decade, Tanner has worked with thousands of men, me included, helping them helping them develop a personal style that reinforces their virtues and builds genuine confidence. His approach moves beyond traditional fashion advice and focuses on 3 key pillars: aesthetics, articulation, and authenticity. Tanner was also my first guest ever on the podcast 5 years ago, almost to the day, and this is the first time he's been on the show since then. Tanner, to kick off my month-long celebration of 5 years of the show, welcome to the Will Spencer Podcast.
Dude, you make me sound real good. Well, I appreciate that intro.
You're welcome. I just pulled a bunch of stuff from masculinestyle.com and put it into a bio for you.
Well, I appreciate it. It's always fun to get to chat and hang out with you. I'm glad to be back, and how rad that it's 5 years that's a good chunk of time. So I'm glad to be back and hanging out.
It's crazy, man. Does it feel like 5 years? It kind of does, and it doesn't. Like, we live in a very different world today than I think we did just 5 years ago.
My world is certainly different than it was, and it's one of those where it's like, has it only been that long? And I can't believe it's been that long. Kind of the both ends of it.
Yeah, it was like 2020, 21, and 22 were such odd years, just in a historical sense, with COVID and coming out of that. And then 23 and 24, that's kind of like the lights came on a little bit. And now here we are in 25, and it kind of feels like that whole COVID thing that happened. Remember, we shut down the world for a couple years. Remember that? Like, don't just forget about all that. And now we're on to now we're on Trump 47, and it feels like this is a completely new horizons have
Right?
opened up in the world and for men.
Yeah. We live in interesting times for sure.
Yeah. So 5 years on, I remember you did a style coaching for me, and that was probably one of the most transformative, if not the most transformative, personal coaching that I've ever done. And I'm still wearing batch shirts, and I've kind of made them nicer with a t-shirt now instead of keeping them all buttoned up. But I still wear these shirts. I still wear Mott & Bow jeans, and I still feel confidence when I go shopping for clothes. And you, to date, are still the only guy that I know who's talking about this stuff, which is awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's nice for me because I don't have to compete with anybody, right? And it's a fun niche to get to be in for sure, especially because a lot of guys still have a tendency to kind of undervalue the importance of their own appearance when it comes to, I think a lot of guys will begrudgingly recognize it when it comes to how it works in dating or maybe from a career perspective, but they don't see the strong correlations as far as how it affects their own sense of self and kind of like how they show up with their own internal relationship and how they view themselves fitting into the world that they either have created for them or they choose to create for themselves. And it's fun to get to work with guys and help them see it's a really pretty potent tool if you know how to use it the right way.
Mm-hmm. Well, why don't you take a moment and just kind of break down the work that you do with men, the value of it, the things that you lead them through. Of course, I mentioned your book, The Appearance of Power, which is still very good. Congratulations, by the way. So maybe just break that down, because I think that there's a possibility to discover a whole new generation of men that are beginning to think about these things.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the best way to really kind of like break it down to its brass tacks is what I do is I help men create extegrity. And that's kind of a term that I've created and played with, but it's the idea of who you are on the outside actually aligning with and reflecting honestly and accurately who you are on the inside. And a lot of guys, especially good men, do a ton of the inner work, and that's way more important than any of the stuff that I do. When you do the inner work as far as your spirituality or healthy relationships or having like a good emotional range, a good emotional control, all of those things are absolutely crucial. And we're not just internal beings, we're not just intellectual beings, but we are social beings. We have physical bodies, and we have our own sense of sight and smell and sound and all of these other things. And when who we are externally can align with and reinforce who we are internally, it creates something that's very powerful, and it creates this really cool synergy, and our identities become stronger, we become more powerful. And what's fun about it, it's unique for everybody. You and I are different men internally. We share a lot of values, but we inhabit the world differently. You know, our family situations are different, our careers are different, our hopes and dreams and aspirations, our hangups and our sins and everything are all a little bit different. And so how we present externally should also be a little bit different. And so what I get to do is help men cultivate that for themselves so that it is very congruent and authentic, but it's also authentic to better higher versions of who they are, as opposed to just, kind of like the postmodern secular version of authenticity, which is just an excuse to indulge in your baser instincts. It's not that kind of authenticity. It's a more noble version of it.
Yeah, I was just strangely enough, I was a guest on a podcast yesterday, and we were talking about this very issue. In fact, I was telling them about the coaching that you do, just
Cool.
just by how it works out, and being able to talk about things in terms of a man's tribe, like the way that a man should dress and present himself will be very different for if his buddies are hunters versus if his buddies are chess players. And it's not a better or worse thing. It's
Hmm.
just two different ways of being. And so
Just
you as a
different.
man, yeah, so you as a man have to know how to dress in a way that suits you, but also and your budget, and that also suits the communities that you're a part of. And I don't think I learned that from you, and I don't think anyone really ever breaks that down for men. We always have to be kind of shoehorned into whatever image we're seeing on the media or on the red carpet.
Yeah. Or sadly, what a lot of us tend to do is just play it safe and dress to something that's so neutral that it never really identifies us with or
Mhm.
against anything in particular. And there's there's certainly times and places where you need to lean further in or further out of particular tribal identities or things like that. But neutrality should be done from a place of intention as opposed to from a place of fear or a lack of awareness or a lack of skill set or anything else.
Yes, so yeah, it should be an expression of who you are as a man rather than sort of desperately trying to fit in.
Right. Yeah. Or even desperately trying to just not there's a difference between fitting in and just not getting noticed. And I think a lot of guys have a tendency to go that route where I will just dress in a way where I don't even show up. I don't attract any positive or any negative attention. I just don't register at all. And
Mhm.
that is more often done from a place of fear or incompetence. And then this sounds like I'm getting on these guys' head. Like it's not anybody's fault. Most of us didn't grow up learning how to navigate any of this stuff. We weren't taught this by our dads. This isn't stuff we were taught in school. Um, but it's usually done from a place of fear or incompetence or some other level of lack that if you just learn how to be able to visually assert yourself a little bit more and it's done in a way that it feels congruent, then you have a little bit more courage to do it and everything just gets better for you when you do
Mhm.
it the right way.
Maybe this relates to a classic meme of yours that I don't see quite as often, at least not as much as I used to. Real men don't care what they look like. So talk about that because that was like your thing forever.
It was, and I still get to pop it up every once in a while. So I've been doing this for 15 years, and as you can imagine, a lot of the resistance that I get given what I do, and a lot of your listeners may even be experiencing this as they listen to us talk is like, why does this matter? Like a real man shouldn't even care what he looks like. He shouldn't care about how his clothing communicates to other people or anything else. Like just be a good man and just dress in XYZ basic clothing and that's all that matters. And that's historically inaccurate
Hmm.
and not the when you zoom out from our little like 20th century Western culture bubble, 20th, 21st, and you look at any other culture at any other point in history, men have always used their appearance and have always cared deeply about appearance. And even within sub-classifications within their different groups, you've got the warrior class that dresses very differently from the priest class, which dresses very differently from bureaucrats or whatever else. And appearance and an intelligent use of appearance has always been part of masculinity in the way that men relate to each other, the way that we relate to women, and the way that we relate to children. And so I love using that meme whenever pictures or photos or paintings or whatever else pops up of all of these different historical examples of men very deeply caring about their appearance. It's a little bit of a dig of like, now you think that they don't care, but we care and we've always cared about it.
Is that the total why men don't care? They think who I am inside as a good person is enough, even if that's not true. Like, or is there? I think there's sometimes like a component of they want to be invisible. When you start dressing in an intentional way, you get noticed, and
Right.
it's just easier to kind of coast through life and hide.
Yeah, there's pressure and expectations and everything that come from being noticed. And life is a lot easier and a lot smoother and a lot more comfortable. It's a whole lot less fulfilling and a whole lot less noble when you fly under the radar. But I certainly get the siren song of that. And I think another thing of it too, in this kind of almost like ironic meta sense, is that a lot of us grew up in a culture where the only appropriately masculine relationship with appearance is indifference to it, but it has to be the right level of indifference. You can't be indifferent enough that you're wearing a dress or garbage bags or something else. You have to be indifferent to the same like t-shirt, cargo shorts, and old sneakers version that everybody else is. And so most guys will wear the same uniform, but we just live in a culture that the uniform is one of apathy or indifference as opposed to a uniform of dignity or nobility or aspiration or self-respect or whatever many other cultures would make their uniform instead.
I remember the cargo shorts, the special enemy, the the nemesis of Tanner Guzy.
Which is funny because even now, like I see guys that wear them and wear them great, and you can do it in a way that works very well. And it's funny because even that is, that's not the same uniform of apathy that we would have seen. Now it's like guys that are in their shiny golf polos and their Lululemon ABC pants and they're like hybrid work sneakers. That's kind of like the new uniform of indifference. That's what most guys just wear without wanting to look like they think too hard, but they're not too outdated on anything either. So the uniform changes, but it's still this idea of you have to look like you don't care.
Mm-hmm. You have to studied indifference. I have to look I have to wear the uniform of not caring.
Exactly.
Interesting. I've never thought of it that way before, but as I look around, sorry, I'm just getting over being sick. But as I look around the world, you see it. You can tell the difference between men who are trying and men who are trying too hard,
right,
and the men who are not trying at all.
Right. And a lot of guys justifiably are afraid of what happens when they try too hard because there's a big risk when you try too hard and you make a fool of yourself or you wear something that looks like it's too much of a costume or you feel like a complete fake and a liar when you put it on. Like these are all justifiable fears is too strong of a word, but like you're justifiably reticent when you think about those potential pitfalls. But it's not impossible to learn to dress better and navigate all of those things without falling into those pitfalls. It's very doable for anybody.
And on the other side, we have, I love another one of your terms, the gentle dork. Now,
yes.
So talk about what that is, then I'll give a little story about that.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I feel like I always have to give this caveat because I rail on these guys, and part of it is because I was a gentle dork myself for a while too. And these are the guys who really don't have any other masculine capital. They're not, they're not strong. They're not courageous. They're not assertive. They're not really masculine in any traditional sense. And they have a tendency to think that they can overcompensate for that by being very like intellectual and highbrow and being very intelligent and articulate, and then also dressing like it's the 1950s, the 1960s. And they don't realize that what this does is rather than it compensating for their lack of general masculine development in other arenas, it actually just highlights it even more. And so they don't look
Yeah.
like Cary Grant. They look like this dorky cosplaying version of Cary Grant. And what made Steve McQueen, Cary Grant, um, Clint Eastwood, all of these great kind of like aspirational figures that a lot of these guys try to dress up as from the 20th century. It wasn't the clothing that made them, it was the combination of the clothing and then just their overall masculine presence. And without one, then the other ends up looking like a costume.
Yeah. There was a guy at a church, won't say which church, but and he was as soon as I saw him, he went for several weeks that while I was there, and he was the classic gentle dork, not a
Mhm.
particularly masculine man, very socially awkward in his speech, incredible at picking out combinations of colors for his suits and his ties, like obviously had a really good sense of color and fit and texture. Like he like from the neck down, it's like,
Mhm.
he looks really good. It's just that from the neck up, it was like it wasn't making up the gap in terms of his ability to relate to the world, so that it actually made him unapproachable to
Exactly.
see the way that he was overdressing.
Yep. Yep. And a lot of guys will use it as a bludgeon or as a club when your style should be something that is just a natural extension of who you are as opposed to a compensation for where you lack.
Say more about that.
Yeah, well, and this is one of the things that I really focus on when I work with my guys. A lot of guys come in and they think that working with me is all about like, here's the colors that work for you, or here's how we should do things based on what your build is, or here's what the latest trends are, or here's kind of how people in your industry dress. And all of those things are very relevant, and we do tackle all of it, but it's not the foundation. The foundation is, who are you? What are you bringing to the table? What is your North Star as far as like what's the man you're building yourself into? And if we know that, then it's very easy to develop a sense of style that does factor in all of those variables, but it brings it in a way that it just becomes okay. One of the best ways that I hear this is when I work with married men. I will have their wives tell me, finally, Will looks like the man that I was the only one who ever saw. Like he now
Hmm.
looks like the man that I know, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where these people who know these men on an intimate level get to see the entirety of who they are. And then when you dress the right way, that now becomes something that's presented to everybody and reinforced back to you, as opposed to it being kept compartmentalized. And what you're presenting is this just muted down version of yourself or this caricatured lying version of yourself that a lot of guys overdo it with as well.
What's interesting, I don't know that when we had this conversation a few years ago, if we talked so much about the influence of wives over the process, probably because I wasn't married at the time, wasn't on my mind, but I imagine that that can be very helpful, but also potentially introduce a lot of friction in some ways
Mhm.
as well. If, she sees him one way, he identifies another way, potentially you see him a third way. I
Mhm.
mean, how do you navigate those tensions?
So I do my best as far as my third way of seeing that as removing that entirely. My job is to teach them how to be able to do it themselves.
Hmm.
Um, and when it comes to helping them navigate that tension in there, sadly, a lot of times it really depends. It kind of shines a flashlight on where the relationship is strong and where it's weak. Because I've seen and worked with clients where when this becomes a very visual representation of the fact that they're working on themselves and they're bettering themselves, and sometimes they have a spouse that's not interested in that, she'll try to drag him back in, or maybe it's a way of him trying to kind of like reclaim his individuality and his identity. And in the past, his wife was the one who chose his clothing for him. And so she resents that he's no longer her mannequin and she can't assert her vision of who she wants him to be onto him, but he's actually asserting his vision of himself onto himself. And so sadly in tense relationships, it can be a way of not exacerbating it, but maybe highlighting in a way that they don't see it. But in really, really healthy relationships, the feedback that I get from wives is always so fun and so good to see because these are women who love their husbands. They love that they're men that are interested in being the best they can be. And when they see a new avenue for that to present itself, they love it. And then what's even better is that they when they see how that affects them as fathers and how they show
Mm.
up differently as fathers, how they become more aspirational for their kids, or their kids get to learn this new level of expression, or it becomes another way for these dads to be mentors and teachers and be involved with their kids. Most of the wives just eat it up and love it because it's just another realm of excellence that they get to see their husbands show up in.
Hmm. And that's the part that I really want to highlight for the listeners is that this outward style coaching is not just outward coaching. This is not just how to dress. It's actually something much, much deeper.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't call it this because I don't have any sort of, degree or anything that would relate to it, but essentially what it is appearance psychology.
Hmm.
It's really being able to understand how you think, how you interact with people, understanding how the world works, but doing it through a visual lens as opposed through talk therapy or an emotional lens or something else. It's the visual approach to it. Yeah,
Hmm. Yeah, just to give an example, do you still do the three style archetypes,
I do.
rakish, rugged,
Absolutely.
refined?
Hmm.
Okay, so I remember when I took your quiz, this would have been back in 2020, actually, and I thought going in that I was going to be like some version of rugged, maybe. And then
Okay.
in taking the quiz, it was like, actually, no, like you're more rakish with refined, and I was not rugged at all. And I was very surprised by that. And then when you and I sat down to talk, it was as if you had analyzed my psychology through this brief quiz, and you pointed out something that had stuck with me to this day, which is that it's refined clothing but with really subtle details, so that if you pay attention you notice there's more going on than just refined. And
Right.
that has really stuck with me since then, and that's sort of become like it's because it's true, not just because I like it, because it's true. So I really, when I do go shopping for clothing, I do try to pick out things that have those little details. Like, no,
Yeah.
it's not enough that it just looks nice. There has to be something about it that makes it special, even if I'm the only guy who notices.
Right. And I love that. I love that it's about, even if you're the only one who notices, because then it's not you putting on a presentation for somebody else. It's you integrating by putting on something that's representative of you, and you feel different and you interact. Okay, I'll give you an example of this. I was just talking with a client yesterday who was at a networking event in Denver, and we had worked very specifically. He's a relatively new client, so this was one of his first events after we had worked together. And the stuff that we had arrived at for him to wear was different than what he had worn before.
Mhm.
And what he noticed was that a ton more people approached him and wanted to interact with him than what he had had before. And part of it was that, yes, he dressed in a way that subtly stood out and made him kind of easily recognizable. But a big part of it was that he was way more comfortable and at ease at this event. And so his posture and his body
Mhm.
language, and even just kind of like, I don't believe in like the woo woo energy stuff, but even just like
Yeah,
his
yeah.
energy, it felt different. And so because he was more calmly confident and sure of himself, it made him more approachable. And so it wasn't that people necessarily related entirely to the clothing, but they related to the clothing plus how he related to his clothing. And that's what the combination was.
Can we take a diversion off the highway for a second? Because
Yeah.
I want to get okay. Do you remember? I think it was like 3 months ago. There was a whole big controversy on X about this man who kind of had like the dad bod, and then he got like super lean. Like
Yes.
he
Yes.
okay, and all the guys were like, the dude on the right looks amazing, and all the women were saying, no, the guy on the left, the before looked amazing, and we
Hmm.
think the guy on the right is gay or whatever is what they were saying. And that was just this entire firestorm. And like my take on it was like, okay, you can say that, but I guarantee you the guy who shows up being super lean and ripped is going to move through his life with so much more confidence that will be so much more attractive than just the surface appearance might be for some women.
Absolutely. And that was one of the things that I noticed is that there was a lot of evaluation, not necessarily of the appearance itself, but what it represented. Because a lot of women were saying, well, I like the guy who he was before because the guy on the right is going to be too focused on his macros and he's not going to be able to be present as a dad, or it's not going to be. And so we do this subconsciously is we assign motivations and morals and attributes and all of these other things onto not only our appearance, but what it takes in order to be able to get to that appearance.
Mhm.
And a lot of times we do it in a negative way, but you're absolutely right. Because somebody who not only looks that way, but has the sovereignty of knowing I took myself from point A to point B, you show up differently because of the confidence that comes from that.
Mhm.
And that's just a visual manifestation of what all of that is. That's the funny thing about all of this appearance stuff is it doesn't happen in a bubble. It does not happen unrelated to the social cues or our own psychological aspects or how much work we had to or didn't have to put into it or anything else like that.
Man, I just gotta say, it is so refreshing to talk to you because you used the word sovereignty. And I remember back in the Manosphere days, like that was one of the words that I thought had some real truth to it. Now, I do want to get into the Manosphere and what's happened,
Yeah,
since then, but like it's good to be going through the wreckage of what's sitting at the bottom of the ocean and kind of harvesting like this was actually a really useful idea of men
good word.
acting with a sense of sovereignty over their own lives, being able to make independent decisions from the collective thinking around them.
Absolutely. And it's a word I still stand by and totally believe in. I don't think I was one that particularly leaned heavily on it, but I do think that it's you have to you have to start from a position of sovereignty and then choose how much you're willing to cede that for the people who matter and for the consequences that you want. We all cede sovereignty when it comes to, we live in a society, but like, that's true.
Yeah.
Or when you're married and a father, you cede certain levels of sovereignty for the betterment of your family. If you believe in God, you cede certain levels of sovereignty in order to be able to submit to his will in a way that is appropriate. And what's cool is when you take it from the perspective of sovereignty, then I feel like very rarely is it actually a what's the word I want? Ceding, cessation? I don't know what the word is, but you're not actually ceding
Con-
it. It's
concession.
yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
But you're investing it
Hmm.
because family life pays out massively. Even when you go through terrible circumstances, I mean, I ceded a lot of sovereignty to my marriage and my marriage blew up, but I've got wonderful kids that it was worth ceding that sovereignty to. And I cede a lot of it to them, but I'm not a victim. I'm not trapped. I'm still sovereign, you know?
Hmm. This is great. I want to dig into this because I talk to a lot of men who are single and who want to be married, and I take them at their word. And but one of the things that I've noticed in myself and that I spent a long time consciously preparing for, as in I met my wife and the woman who would become my wife, we met in August of 2024. It had become clear by December, January that this had marriage potential. We were engaged by I think it was April and married in June, married in July. Sorry, so engaged in May, engaged in April, married in July,
Cool.
and so but I was a single guy and I'd been single for a long time, but I started preparing myself mentally about 6 months before the wedding, before we were even engaged, to know that, okay, what is my day going to look like if my wife is here walking around, if my kids are here walking around? I cannot be the same guy that I am just in private. And just
Yeah.
to, not that I'm walking around in sin all day, but I'll give you a good example. Like when I would, eat by myself and make myself dinner, I would sit and I would watch videos of chess breakdowns, like channels that like analyze chess games.
Okay.
That's what I'd watch while I would
Yeah.
eat. You know what I mean? It's not mindless,
It's
but
amoral.
it's completely amoral. Exactly.
Mhm.
It's fun. It's entertaining. Exactly. Now, I'm probably not going to be able to sit and watch chess videos anymore. I'm not going to have
Right.
time. And so thinking about those things. So let's talk about the process of men who don't want to be single. They want to be married, like getting ready to give up that sovereignty. Cause I don't know that enough men think about that.
It's interesting that you're asking me this because I am finding myself from the complete opposite direction
Yes.
where, I was married for 13 years and we have a lot of kids. And I feel like I had been able to carve out a really, really good balance of like I worked for myself. And so I had a lot of autonomy and a lot of sovereignty in that regard. And I was able to kind of control my schedule and work out when I wanted to and work when I wanted to. And I had great friends. Like I feel like I had a really good balance in a lot of that. And now I find myself in a position where I I don't know what it's like to be single. I'm 2 years in,
Mm,
and I'm still learning what it's like to have what? Like, my own my own it's so weird because it sounds so funny saying it, but like everything that I did wasn't it, I did not have a life that was built around like happy wife, happy life
Hmm.
or like this immediate, but everything was built around family and legacy and building and all of that. And even the way that I was able to turn my hobbies and my friendships and my connections into things that either made money or I felt like they made me a better father or they were things that I could connect with my kids on or things like that. And I still have a lot of need for that and a lot of drive for that. And at the same time, I have a lot of time that I can, if I want to, I can sit in here and I can play video games for 8 hours straight and just numb myself and distract myself,
Hmm.
you know? And so I don't know if I'm the right guy to ask that question because I've always been so, I'm so much more capable of finding the balance of what? Balancing, converting, investing, leveraging, maybe all of those words my sovereignty into a family dynamic that I'm in a lot of ways incredibly lost when I don't have that direction to channel it into 100% of the time.
Hmm. Well, that's just as valuable because I'm sure there are plenty of men that have that same feeling. Like I know plenty of men who are looking for the opportunity to have the yoke placed around their neck, and then there are
Mhm.
some men that reach a stage in their life through no fault of their own where suddenly that yoke is taken off.
Yeah,
And they're like, I don't know who I am without this weight that's sort of that I use to anchor myself.
right. Yeah, and I've found that for me, one of the interesting things in the last 2 years has been I've just been in this kind of like limbo of, and a lot of guys, certainly a lot of Manosphere guys would tell me I'm an idiot because I've lived out in what a lot of ways are like Reddit horror stories. It's the stuff that a lot of you
Yeah.
guys read and sometimes you go, there's no way this could be real. And sadly, my experience is a lot of it is real. I want to get married again. Like I want to be
Yeah.
partnered with somebody forever. Like I have no interest in hedonistically playing the field and racking up notch counts. Like I want to be married and build a deep connective mutually beneficial relationship in life with somebody. And one of the things that's been a challenge is realizing how subconsciously I've been just in this kind of like limbo or purgatory or waiting period of like, when I find somebody that I can click with and we can build that in, then I can get back on track to where I want to be. And so one of the things that I'm actively trying to do right now, I actually just did a Substack on this, is and I still love all the X jargon and everything else, is I'm
Hmm.
romance maxing. And not from like a dating perspective or anything else like that, but I'm trying to make my life with what it is as enjoyable and romantic and kind of like aspirational as it can be. So like a great example is I do the same thing as you, except I just mindlessly scroll TikTok when I eat dinner.
Hmm.
And now it's like, no, I'm going to put on like good music and I'm going to sit down at my dinner table and I will have taken some time to like actually cook dinner as opposed to just like nuking a quesadilla in the microwave or whatever else as a way to just like live my life as what it is right now as opposed to waiting for my circumstances to change and then feeling like I can get back to living the life that I had and that I loved so much.
Hmm. Sort of not really taking a step off the path of who you used to be and just continuing on in that vein of living. I don't know what we say. It's not a dignified life, but it's like leading a put together life, leading a life of respect of your time and respect of yourself, and not letting the sudden shift in circumstances sort of jar you into being some lesser version.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is that for me, even when things were really good, I always had a hard time being present. I think that's a trap that a lot of us that are very self-development minded fall into is it's always like, what's the next goal? What's the next
Mm.
milestone? What's the next PR or whatever else? And I certainly got on that treadmill and that was part of how I contributed to the detriment of my marriage was that things were just never good enough. What I
Mm.
did wasn't good enough. What she did wasn't good enough. What my kids did wasn't good enough. And it wasn't because they weren't good things, but I was just like, okay, that PR is now the new baseline and we have to get to something else. And so it was this kind of like it it's almost like gluttony for growth, you know? And I don't think that we need to stop being growth minded. And for me, being present, that term never really did a lot. But if I can make my life feel more cinematic, more romantic, more just kind of like immersive, as opposed to it always having to be progressive or distractive,
Hmm.
then that's where I'm finding I'm reclaiming a lot of my individual sovereignty right now.
That's you're building a life and life rhythms that feel the way that you want it to feel. That isn't always focused on the next hill. It's like, well, you've arrived at a pretty decent hill where you're at right now.
Right.
Right. And always being focused on the next hill. Yeah, there's a way that we should do that as men. We should be looking towards the next horizon, but not at the expense of missing what's right in
Exactly.
front of us. And you can do that as a unexpectedly single man at this stage of life.
Right. Yeah. Learning to, getting better at it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, because um, of course, I met you when you were married, and you've shared some stories about things that have gone on. And so, over the past couple of years, we were talking about like seeing you rebuild from that, like knowing the life that you had built, the man you were, and what you had, and then to see it just all kind of blow up in its own way, and then to see you kind of rebuild in this new guy, like it makes sense why you're like, okay, well, who am I now? I
Hmm.
get to choose. This is who I am, and I like being this guy in the hope that this is the road that will take you where you're going. It seems like it
Yeah.
is.
And even if it doesn't, or even if it takes a lot longer, because I think that's another one of the things that's happened. And I've done this my whole life is I've always just waited. I've
Hmm.
always wanted to be at the next stage in my life. And I think that's part of the reason why um, my particular life blow up was so hard because um, I we had a great relationship for a decade,
Yeah.
and I would say that the years 2019 to 2022 were almost as idyllic as it gets as far as a lot of different circumstances are concerned. And so for me, that was like the only time in my life that I wasn't waiting for something else to happen. I had finally gotten to a
Mm.
point where, yeah, it was like, how do I work on this PR for at the gym? Or how do I set this next goal for this accomplishment? Or how do I scale the business? But it wasn't that things were so far from where I wanted them to be that I was always just like, well, maybe when I do this, then I'll be happy. And then now to have so much of that stripped away, I've wasted a lot of the last 2 years going back into this mindset of if I can change my circumstances and if I'm patient enough, then I can be happy again. And it's more learning that I may be in this for a while. I
Yeah.
may not find a good relationship for another 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, who knows how long it's going to be. And I don't want to waste the entirety of that time waiting to be happy and waiting for my circumstances to change. Whether I'm waiting passively or actively, it's still waiting.
You want to know something funny?
Please.
You and I have like completely changed positions due to our change in circumstances. Because I am not generally like a hyper goal oriented guy. I focus very much on presence.
Hmm.
Presence is something that I have in spades. But now here I am married, and everyone listening gets to hear the story. Like my wife is pregnant, and we went for
So
our
rad.
ultrasound yesterday, and so got the photos, and the baby's 9 weeks old, and got to see the little
Yes.
heartbeat on the ultrasound, and I got real emotional looking at that.
Oh, dude, I love it. I'm
So yeah,
so stoked for you.
me too. And presence is great. And presence is absolutely something that I can and should and do bring to my wife and to my daughter and to my family in the evenings when I'm there. And, presence isn't going to help feed and clothe a
Right.
growing number of kids,
Right.
right? And it like don't sacrifice presence to do those things, like just throw it out the window. It has meaning, but I need to bring out more parts of myself. So I'm learning to be more goal oriented and goal driven. And meanwhile, here's you on the other side being like, I was super goal oriented. Now I'm going more
Right.
towards presence, that's kind of wonderful, actually.
Well, and I think that's the beauty of these different circumstances, and I have always talked about how for me, marriage and fatherhood were rocket fuel. I was
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily super ambitious. I wasn't necessarily super present. I was just really good at distracting myself, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, same.
Up until I grew up, and for me, marriage and family did that, and it really turned on a lot of that ambition that I don't think it would have otherwise. And I'm grateful for the unique circumstances that brought him there. And I'm also really grateful for the unique circumstances that I'm in right now, because I think about how, if my world wouldn't have blown up, what would I be doing right now? And it still would have been on that progress treadmill of like, what's the next big thing? What's the next big step? And I still don't think I wouldn't have been able to be as fulfilled and as joyful as I wanted to be. I wouldn't have been able to be as present with my kids and as good of a dad as I want to be. I wouldn't have been able to be as good of a husband as I want to be. And in a lot of ways, it feels like, obviously agency comes into play and God has more, and there's a whole lot more to it. But I think one of the blessings from this is God is giving me an opportunity to embrace presence and romance max, as opposed to just be a continued, I haven't thought of this term before I just said it, but I'm going to use this, a growth glutton. Yeah.
Man, you're so good at coming up with these things. I remember the first time that I ever heard your name. I think would have been in 2020. I think it was LARPing personal development. That was like your first meme that really hit, I think. Was that it?
Probably that one's mine. Yeah.
This is these ideas like you read all the personal development books, but you don't actually like implement anything that they say.
It. Yeah. Yeah.
So
my Audible account shows a very different man than who I am. Right.
Exactly. So now another one is growth glutton. You got to be writing these down, man. These are all stories. No. And I think that there's a way in which we have to learn to be responsive in this way, like mindfully responsive to our circumstances. Like you could rage against your sort of circumstances, and you could say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to kick it into sixth gear because I don't want to wait. And then you could, without the constraints, you could run yourself, right off the cliff or into the ground or burn yourself out. But it's like, no, I'm going to mindfully slow down and make my life into something that I feel comfortable in right now, rather than, you have a big semi truck that's pulling a load and then you decouple it from the load. What happens? Like, does the truck fishtail out? Like, you don't want that to happen.
Yeah. And I think that's another one of the blessings for me of this weird kind of like bipolar nature of what my life is, because I do have 7 young kids when they're here. My oldest is 13 and my youngest is 16 months. And so when I have the kids here, work is incredibly difficult to get done. It's,
you don't say.
It's right. It's interactions with clients, and if I'm lucky, I can sneak out a daily email, and like that's the extent of it.
Yeah.
And then when they're not here, I can go days, because I work from home. I can go days without coming up for air, of just like working and grinding and trying to figure things out and trying to get more business or other things. And I think in a way it is such a blessing to not have the ability to go all in on either one of those. There's been some guardrails on the road as a result of that. Yeah,
absolutely. And in a similar way, for me, I have to get much more efficient with my time. And also, like, now that I'm in the circumstances, wife and kids, the things that I want for them is very different than the things that I want for myself. As a single man, it's like, yeah, I'm good with what I've got. It works. Maybe I want to marginal increases here and there, maybe splurge on like a big, nice thing, like a big, nice car or something. But like single guys are usually like that. But I can look at my wife and say, there are all these things that I want to give her. And that inspires me to want to work harder to be able to provide. And so that's a mindful response to my life circumstances, instead of being like, oh my gosh, it's overwhelming, or instead of being status conscious, like, well, how can I respond to this? It sounds like you're doing the same.
Trying. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, I guess I want to talk a little bit about the manosphere in relation to all this, because I think the reason, well, there are many reasons, but the big reason why the manosphere failed is that it didn't have a healthy vision of kids and family. It couldn't think of itself beyond the casual sex, build muscles, big money mindset, and think about men giving their lives to women, to a woman for life and children. Like there wasn't room for that. And so I think as men reached a certain age, they're like, cool, I've mastered a lot of these lessons, or I certainly understand them. And now I want to do the natural thing that men do, which is get married and settle down. And all the manosphere had to say was like, all women are like that.
It's risk. It's all risk and no
Yeah.
reward. Yeah. Yeah, and I think, I think about some of my experience and some of the guys. I think about guys like Ed Lattimore or Alexander Cortez or guys like you who really have kind of like leaned into and embraced new roles of marriage and fatherhood. Like I love seeing Alexander leaning into like buying land and all these other things, or how much Ed loves being a dad
Yeah.
and stuff like that. I think that, and maybe this is a good thing. I haven't actually thought about a lot of this, so I'm just going to think out loud, and I probably will disagree with a lot of this in a week, but we'll just think
Totally
out
fine.
loud. We'll just talk out loud. Um, I think a lot of the manosphere was very much the opposite side of the coin of feminism, and I'm not the first one to say that, but it was a very
Agree.
reactionary,
Hmm.
kind of like meeting place and mindset and ethos and everything else. And when you get enough people that are able to get out of a state where they have to be reactive and can get into a state where they're proactive, and they've got these accomplishments and they've successfully built these things, then you don't need the old scaffolding
Hmm.
anymore, and so maybe what a lot of it was, and I think we can even see that from like a macro perspective, was a lot of it was scaffolding for the right guys. I think a lot of it was there were certainly like purity spirals and a lot of drama and everything else like that. We had a
Yeah.
lot of guys that, and I'm sure that there are guys who would say this about me as a result of what happened with my marriage, but you had a lot of guys that there was a duplicity or duplicitousness about how they presented themselves
Yeah.
versus who they really showed up to be. And I think that that is one of the hard things about it is, and you can see this in my own content, and I've written about this a lot because I know that I am a public figure and I'm tied to this space. How do I present in a way that is equal parts aspirational and humble?
Hmm.
And a lot of guys missed the humility aspect of it. And it was, and I don't even think it was always necessarily malice. I think a lot of times guys would post stuff as a way to kind of like just reinforce that this is who I'm trying to become, or this is what I want to be. It's not like, I'm just
Yeah.
putting on this face to show. But then the problem is when you have all aspiration and no humility, then eventually when the flaws that we all have bear fruit and you
Hmm.
see the results of that come into the spotlight, then you get knocked off of the pedestal that you never should have been on in the first place. And I think a healthy dose of humility is what keeps us from putting ourselves or from having other people put us up on pedestals. And most of the manosphere lacked any humility.
Hmm. Yeah. And then sort of the 4 years of Biden came along. And, when Trump was president, that was sort of gave air cover for a lot of men, as it is now, to
Hmm.
begin thinking and speaking about these things. And then from 2020 to 24, during the Biden presidency, when things turned considerably darker, a lot of men's sins came to the forefront. Andrew Tate decided that he was going to eat the whole buffet, and kind of
Hmm.
did. And so I think there's a component of it where there was never anything solid built there kind of to begin with. The duplicity was a part of it as well. And again, there was this lack of humility. There was a siloed thinking. The interpersonal drama was, of course, a big thing. And I think you're right that it was feminism for men.
Hmm.
And I think there was a way in which it was productive for a lot of guys. But yeah, it's a vehicle that was meant to be left behind.
Yeah.
It drove you a certain distance. Now you have to get out and you either build your own car or walk on foot, or however you think about the metaphor. But like, it was never meant, men were never meant to set up camp and live there.
No,
Yeah.
no. And I think that what's hard is that for a lot of people, you couldn't, I mean, you make a good income and you have status and clout and all of
Yeah.
these other things, and it's addictive to be on that side of things, and especially because you can come up with very real and very moral justifications of we're helping men and they're in these hard places and we're helping them navigate this and it's self-development and all of that. And it's just so tricky because you have to be very, again, I think humble is the right word. I think you have to be very humble to be able to parse out, when are you actually doing this to help, or are you using help as a justification to just serve your own ends and your own needs? And I think the
Hmm.
guys that have been able to still move themselves into different spaces, like, okay, Jack Donovan, he and I, on like theological levels, are about as antithetical and as opposite as it gets.
Yeah,
And I've
same.
been right, and I've been friends with Jack for years, and he's one who I still just really love and appreciate his sincerity. And I think that he does a good job with his guys, and he's built a good club with the Order of Fire where those guys feel like they have a space, you know? And and again, I have my theological differences with what the end goal is or things like that, but I don't see Jack as somebody who's this grifter or somebody who is trying to leverage. I just see a lot of sincerity from him, and I don't necessarily see it from other people. And there are certainly other people, and I don't want to get into name games, but I
Right.
I can see good examples and poor examples from all sides, as far as like those of us that used to make up kind of the core of what the Manosphere was. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. I think Jack he is sincere, and he has tried to offer something.
Hmm.
He and I haven't spoken in over 3 years at this point. So, so I don't really know. I don't know where he's at. He also blocked
Yeah.
me on X, so like whatever. But I will say that the man that I knew back then, he was genuinely trying, and it was from a sincere heart. And there are others out there for sure who, maybe some of them still around, maybe some of them are not, who are not doing it from a sincere heart.
Hmm.
And that creates a very different feeling. And that
Yeah.
that was the sincerity is what I always found appealing, is that there was a realization, maybe not consciously expressed, but that certainly had been around since the 90s, that for whatever reason, men don't know what it means to be a man anymore. This is a
Hmm.
generational problem. It crosses all boundaries of age, race, class. Like, they just don't know. And some men, out of a spirit of maybe they learned for themselves, maybe they had a good father who taught them, they wanted to offer something to other men. And it was flavored with, well, yeah, I got to make a living doing it, and I think that's
Right.
okay. But it was flavored with, no, I do this because I genuinely care, as opposed to seeing it as a market to exploit.
Yeah.
Because you could see it both ways. You could look
Yes.
at it and say, like, that guy over there is hurting. If I
Right.
poke at his wound and he cries out, I can sell him the medicine too. And
Yeah.
just, and that you can do it that way. And
And
I
there were
think
plenty of guys who did.
there were tons who did that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think the men who really wanted to offer something, where it's like, don't stick around, like, grow up and leave home. Don't live here. For you can't, like, if you want to stay here in the club or whatever, cool. But like, the goal is that you become your own man,
Which
not that
is
you stay. Go ahead.
well, sorry, I interrupted you, but
No, it's
that's
okay.
like, that's the ultimate in masculine mentorship.
Yeah,
It's that I don't need you to be my protege in order for me to feel in order for me to maintain my identity as a mentor. I legitimately want you to leave and be able to be on your own. Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. Well, and when you, this is the tricky part, because when you start getting into monthly recurring revenue
Hmm.
models, there's a disincentive. There's nothing wrong with that, but like, you have to, within yourself as an individual man, release that and trust that God will bring more men to you, and not to try and squeeze out every dollar you can from the guys who come to you.
Yeah. And I think that that's one of the ways that I haven't thought about this, but that's kind of a blessing for me, actually, because I knew that what I do with style coaching, one, was not a big enough like hair on fire problem that there was real pain to exploit. So the temptation wasn't even there. It was more of this kind of like, you're good. How do we take you up to an even higher level, as
Yeah.
opposed to like, your life is miserable. How do we dig you out of it? And then also that, because it was so little of a like hair on fire problem, there really was no monthly recurring revenue model that worked. And so very early in, I leaned on this idea of my job is to get you to not need me anymore.
Hmm.
And that's been my marketing for 10 years. And I never really thought about this, but because these different mindsets and ethos don't exist in a bubble or in a vacuum, I think that that's part of why I never really got trapped into a lot of these same pitfalls that a lot of other guys did, because there was never a conflict between my goals for my clients and what I could find worked for my business. I didn't have to navigate that like a lot of guys did.
Hmm. Yeah, and then that's a blessing. If you proceed
Yeah.
with that mindset, as opposed to like sort of, I think Andrew Tate played into a lot of this. I've described him as the apex predator of the manosphere. He's the guy who did
Hmm.
all the things that other guys only talked about. You want to talk about, being fit? Well, dude fights professional MMA fights.
Right.
Professional, maybe not with UFC, but MMA for sure. You want to talk about making money? Like, the dude's a multi-hundred millionaire. Yeah, with Cam Girl Empire, but the money don't
Hmm.
know where it come from, right? And then you want to talk about, success with women. The dude's basically a digital pimp. You know what I mean? So he's the guy, and he drives a Bugatti and wears an iced out watch and stuff. So he's the guy that did everything that a lot of guys were only speculating about. He wasn't a virtuous man, but he still did them. And when you come from an anti-moral Nietzschean, philosophy, which is kind of what the Manosphere was, there's no grounds to say that what he's doing is wrong. So he just comes and he just eats everybody's lunch, joins the war room, becomes the most searched name on the internet. I think it was summer 2022, more than Donald Trump. And so suddenly this giant core of the market goes to the bigger fish in town. And then what's left? You have a lot of guys scrambling to hold on to something where the sand has been eaten out
Yeah.
from beneath them.
I never thought about it from that perspective, but you're spot on, because he did. He walked the walk in not just one way, but in all these different ways. And when you come at it from that amoral as opposed to pro-moral perspective on things, and I think, and again, this is where Jack talks about, and I appreciate the distinction between being good at being a man versus being a good man.
Yeah.
And I think that we're called to be both, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is when you have good people that are not good at being men, then it's really easy to lose your lunch to people who are good at being men but aren't necessarily good people.
That's right. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. The problem was always in the choice that you had to be good at being a man or be a good man.
Right.
And what does it mean? What does it mean to be both? And the answer for me ultimately came from Christianity. This surprised me. Like, I went into the Manosphere. I found the men's movement in 2013. I found the Manosphere in 2018. You and I met in 2020. I spoke at the 21 convention in 2021. By 2022, I was too Christian, I think, and I was thrown out. But that led me deeper into the Christian faith, and I realized that, that's the picture that actually harmonizes being good at being a man in
Yeah.
some of the highest and greatest ways, particularly around self-sacrifice, and also being a good man.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, well, finally, and everything that I was looking for in the place, literally the last place I would ever think to look.
There's a home for all of this. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think to some extent, I think the Manosphere failed to respond to that challenge. Is that, okay, cool. You got hundreds of thousands of men around the world that are talking about what it means to be a man.
Mhm.
And then you have the rival of God the Father and his son, Jesus Christ, back into the dialogue. They never went anywhere, but back into the dialogue. And how do you respond to that picture?
Yeah.
And do you reject it? Or do you say, wow, maybe this actually has something to teach me? And I think a
Right.
lot of men rejected it.
Yeah, especially because I think one of the things that happens is that, and this is one of the paradoxes or the contraries of Christianity that I think a lot of people struggle with, and I love those contraries, is that for a lot of guys that have been victimized their entire lives, or at least felt like they've been victimized their entire lives, and then they finally find a space that not only gives them permission, but also gives them a roadmap to reclaim some measure of sovereignty. And then they're told that, yeah, but you actually have to willingly cede some of that back in order to be moral. Like, it's not that the best person is the one who accumulates the most autonomy, but there's actually a give and take relationship with autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to reach the measure of your creation and the highest level of fulfillment, you have to willingly give some of that back. And that's stuff that we've already talked about. I think a lot of guys, they just were so happy to finally have it that they clung to it desperately, and it was too hard to let go of it in the healthy ways that were necessary to get them to the next level.
That makes sense. Yeah, you, for the first time in your life, you have a little bit of independence, a little bit of sovereignty. You've learned to reclaim some autonomy, and the idea that now you as a man are going to join a church, and you as a man have to be in submission to a man who you might not 100% agree with.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say it's a healthy church and it's not, run by women.
Right.
So like you still like have to give up some of your autonomy. And maybe your pastor or maybe the elders don't agree with all of your political takes or whatever. You still have to give that up if you want to be part of this. And that ask was too much for men. That's a really good way of looking at it.
Or you think about all of the anti-marriage, anti-family rhetoric, and it's all a risk of losing autonomy is really what it is.
Say more about that.
Yeah, I mean, you think about, she takes half your stuff, or you don't get to see your kids, or you lose all your time, or you don't get to go out with your friends. Even if you are married, you don't get all this level of autonomy that you had before. It's ultimately all predicated on the assumption that the happiest man or the best man or the most fulfilled man is the one who has consolidated the most autonomy. And any risk to that is not worth taking. And, I think it's almost like Aesop's fable of like the miser that has the gold buried in the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a guy that comes along and he ends up saying, well, if you're not going to do anything with it, why not just put a stone in there and paint it gold? And I think a lot of men have done that with our sovereignty and our autonomy. It's like, if you're not going to spend it on something, what's the point of having it? And I think that a lot of us have become misers of our power.
Yeah, say more about that. Keep going with this. I love this way of thinking about it.
I'm trying to think about how that even, and this is all just me again thinking out loud and and trying to think about this. But really, like, if I circle back to conversations that I've been a part of and the way that I've seen things happen, from marriage, from religion, from having children. And I think this is the sad irony, is that this is not unique to men or to the manosphere, but this is the ultimate goal of, this is what feminism has done for women or anything else, is it's taught us that anything that tells us that we will be better by sacrificing power is oppressive and is a lie.
Anything that tells us, so this is the message of the manosphere, anything that tells us that we'll be better by sacrificing power, the thing that's telling us that is lying, is a lie.
Yes. Okay. Churches are lying to us. Society is lying to us. Women are lying to us. And it's the same thing, again, it's the same thing that women are being, and dude, this is the thing that is so fascinating about being back in the dating world.
Oh man.
Right? I mean, for me, it's so fascinating to be in here because the last time I was in the dating world I was in my early 20s, and you learn how terrified people are when they're in their 30s or their 40s to cede any power to anybody, or how quickly we label like healthy interdependence as codependence, or like a desire for co-regulation as like, and there's all these like therapy terms that are thrown about and bandied about for everything. And we've pathologized a healthy mutual relationship into a threat to everybody's autonomy and everybody's power.
That makes a lot of sense, because from two different angles. One angle is, you have the people who were in situations where the autonomy that they had given up, that interdependence was abused, where it was like it was taken advantage of. You have those situations, but you also have a general cultural thrust right now that's about expressive individualism in a hyper expressive individualistic kind of way. Nothing, no tradition, not even set of laws, not even physical biological reality can be said to have a claim over me. If I tell you that I'm a woman in a man's body, even my own genetics have no control. So I think those two factors tend to collide, where it's like, okay, Okay, and is this not feminism, and is this not feminism for men? The two factors collide, and they say, anything that constrains your autonomy is a lie, and those who constrain your autonomy, who have authority over you, they're abusive, and so the only response
Yes.
has to be to throw both off.
Yes, absolutely. And ultimately, what it sadly has done is it has convinced us that we are all little gods.
Hmm.
I am a god unto myself. And anybody that demands that I be subjected to anything bigger than myself is oppressive. And anybody who doesn't respect my truth and worship at my altars the way that they should is also somebody that needs to be cut out of my life.
Hmm. It's funny. I was just at the National Conservatism Conference, NatCon, about a month ago.
Mm.
And so national conservatism is a political movement with a very heavy Christian element to it, Judeo-Christian especially. The founder, Yoram Hazony, is an Israeli Jew, and there are lots of Christians of all denominations speaking there. And so their entire, I guess, perspective is to push back on the individualistic approach of the Enlightenment. Everything
Mhm.
since the Enlightenment has been hyper individualistic, and so now you have national conservatism that's pushing back on that from a biblical standpoint. Is that we aren't just individuals who are sovereignly dropped onto the world. Man is free and everywhere is born in chains. I think that's Rousseau.
Mhm.
Instead, we are born into families, tribes, nations that have claims over our behavior and our
Yes.
beliefs, and so I listened to everything they said. I read the books, and it's like, okay, I can actually get down with this. And to find that there are elements on the right that can't stand it, it's like, okay, the friction there is between the people who want to continue to say, you know what, no, I'm an individual sovereign, you have no claim over me besides that of like the law, because we live in a
Right.
nation of laws. But like, no, tradition, family, nation, these things have no claim over me. It goes really, really far.
Yeah. It goes really, really far. And I think that for me, this is why I love the imagery of the straight and narrow path,
Hmm.
because one of the things that we see such a good example of is that we have, whether it's individual sin or societal downfall or these big major issues that we get so scared of that we push ourselves so far away from it that we end up falling into, it's the horseshoe theory, or it's
Yeah.
Aristotle's like virtues and vices and things like that. It's the same thing. But I think that we've done that where we are right to fear so many of the downfalls of collectivism or communism or oppression or all of these other things. But when you bastardize it to the point where you can become evil in the other direction, or you can become fallen and yeah, downfallen in the other direction. And I think this is where a lot of us have gone, and we've made autonomy into a false god, and we worship really readily at that altar.
Mm-hmm. Just
Yeah.
like others have made sort of collectivism into a false
Hmm.
god, a lack of autonomy. Like, yeah, you can have super oppressive regimes, that are materially oppressive, meaning like
Hmm.
they've got guns and jackboots, and they keep everyone in line, like the dystopian science fiction.
Right.
But you can go just as far in the other direction as saying, no, my individual liberty means that I can just kind of do whatever I want, and I will be equally oppressive to you in preventing you from constraining my behavior at all. Like,
Right.
everything must be permitted for everyone
Right.
is equally oppressive ultimately.
Well, and then I think what makes it even trickier and harder is that the solution is not, you can use this as kind of like libertarianism versus communism as kind of like the political extremes of that,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And the problem is not, or the solution is not necessarily this like milk toast, moderate, middle of the road type of thing, but it's being able to recognize when elements of one attitude are predominant and appropriate and when elements of another attitude are what's most appropriate. And it's being, ironically, sovereign enough to be able to hold the tension between these contraries, to be able to say, I'm going to lean this way on this and I'm going to lean that way on that, as opposed to I have to always be in this camp or I have to always be on that camp and let that do the thinking and the decision making for me.
I'm so glad you went back to the word sovereign, because one of the things that I've observed, that a battle that I've been fighting, is I think a lot of men are afraid to stand up against their bros when their bros are getting into bad ideas. And
Hmm.
there's a lot of that online right now. It's
Hmm.
growing like wildfire, sadly. And so I encourage them. You have to take a stand against your bros. I know it's the most unnatural thing to do. It may seem disloyal, but if you believe and you are loyal to a higher moral law, then you have to say something to your friends, and it's unloving to say otherwise. That's the position I've taken, and I found that appeal that doesn't always land. But I think the idea of saying, can you be sovereign even over the influence of your friends?
Mm.
I think that is a powerful way of framing it. Both are true. Not something
Yeah.
it's just a different way of skinning the cat.
Yeah. And I think that kind of stuff, we can even tie this back into what I do as far as like from a style perspective. It's not always like what you do matters, but how you do it matters. Right. And so I think about
Yeah.
this like I spent years trying to figure out how to be present and it didn't work. And then as soon as the idea of like romance maxing and making my life feel more romantic and more cinematic, it's the same thing, but it's just phrased in a way that actually clicks with me. And so it's the same thing with sovereignty, where it's like, yeah, you have this moral obligation, which you do to, if you really love your friends, you're going to stop them, do everything you can to stop them from going down bad paths. Absolutely. And that may click for some people, but for some people, if you phrase it from a sovereignty perspective, it may click a little bit differently as well. So yes, what we do matters, but how we do it matters just as much.
Yeah, and it's the same for me with goals. Like if the goal for me is just racking up another zero, that doesn't necessarily have a appeal for me. But if I can say like, hey, doing this will help me, gift my family with X, Y, and Z, and have a little bit more sovereignty over my time to
Right.
be able to be more present, for my young kids than my dad was able to be. That's the sort of thing like, yeah, I can 1,000% get behind that.
Absolutely.
But if it's just about like, I want to run up the big number just for the sake of having it, yeah, I suppose that for some men are motivated by that, and that's completely fine.
Right.
But that doesn't click with me.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think this is the beauty, and maybe this is another reason why growth as a man, especially now, is so interesting, is that we get the chance to learn this stuff kind of on the fly. It's like there's like a pioneering spirit in a way.
There is. And I think that more of us need to kind of take that approach to it. And again, that comes down to this level of sovereignty, because it's a lot easier to be an acolyte than it is to be a pioneer.
Yeah.
And right. And so when you have your gurus that are the pioneers and you buy into the programs and you just follow what they say on their Substacks and stuff like that, then you don't have to carry the burden of responsibility for the outcome of it. And if it fails, you get all the upside if it works, but you don't have to take any of the risk if it doesn't work, because acolytes get to blame the leader on it. Right. Whereas if you think about it more from the lens of being a pioneer, there's more self-experimentation, there's more sovereignty, there's more self-responsibility, there's more of that masculine mantle and weightiness that comes in with it. But that really is the attitude that we need, because we're in, like, the old world is dead. We're in like the 20th century bureaucratic Western world is dead. We're seeing it sartorially, we're seeing it culturally, we're seeing it spiritually. And it doesn't mean God is dead. It doesn't mean civilization is dead. It doesn't mean any of that. But it means that the ways that all of those things existed don't exist anymore. But we're not in the new phase yet. We're in the transition, which is the hardest position to be in. And you have to have pioneers in those transition phases.
This is fantastic, because I think one of the things that so many men are feeling, understandably so, is that, and this also explains a lot of the enthusiasm for SpaceX and Elon Musk, is that we've covered the world, we've covered the planet. There is no go west, young men. There is no Western expansion. We expanded all the way to the west to California, and now people are bouncing off and heading back to the east. The bottoms of the ocean, like who wants to go there? The deserts, everything has been mapped. And so men who have a pioneering spirit, what are we pioneering towards. And so you look at Elon Musk, who wants to go to Mars. Cool, fine, talk about that separately. But I think not every man's going to be Elon Musk, and not every man's going to go to Mars. So how can we have this pioneering spirit, the sense of adventure in our own lives in a way that's fulfilling to us as men, that doesn't necessarily involve something with like going out and conquering some physical plot of dirt?
That's such a good question. And I think one of the other things that makes it even trickier to navigate is that we can have that pioneer spirit subverted by consuming pioneering as opposed to participating in it. So we do it in video games, we do it in shows, we do it in, again, that LARPing personal development is, if I listen to all the Audible books and I'm pioneering, but I'm not actually doing things, or if I'm just like a Musk fanboy, I think a lot of guys that get really involved in like, their, and again, there's nothing wrong with any of these things, with being really into tech and like being excited about the latest stuff. But it needs to be something that we are participating in rather than just consuming. And how you do that in your own life is going to be very different and very challenging. But I think this is a really good call to action for me of like, and I think that this even fits into like what the romance maxing is like, what are the things that are worth pioneering and experimenting that I either need to start doing or I'm already doing, but I can come at it with new vigor and vitality if I think about it from that perspective, as opposed to I'm tired. You know
Right.
what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, like the pioneer spirit is there. There's a way in which a pioneer spirit, my pastor talks about things in terms of pioneer faith that we see all throughout the New Testament and the Gospels. You see the stories of people who had pioneer faith, like the hemorrhaging woman. She just, if I just touch the hem of his cloak, I will be healed. My pastor says that's pioneer faith, where it's like she doesn't know entirely what's going on. She's willing to take a risk. If I just touch him, that's how powerful that what's going on is. And then she confesses the whole story. That's pioneer faith. And so there's a way in which being pioneering draws us towards something that's beyond where we're currently at, while also maintaining a healthy tie to what was. Like, we're not pioneering just for ourselves. We're not going to be a recluse. There's something we're trying to do on behalf of others.
Yeah. And I mean, really what you're just describing actually is active faith, because you can't have faith if you are unwilling to put yourself in risky situations. Right?
Yeah.
Because if everything is known and you've got a pretty good understanding of what the likelihood, like my turning on a light is not an act of faith.
Right.
It's not. When Edison was trying to figure out how to make light bulbs work, that was an act of faith because at the time it was unknown, right? And so yeah, I think that what we're missing, that's so interesting. Do we consume other people's faith, or do we pro do we commodify it in in what we watch or what we play or the music that we listen to,
Yep,
versus actually living it actively? And so it's almost this like bait and switch into thinking that we're being faithful, but it's not actually yielding any results. And so we have to go get our faith fix by doing it again in something that is a simulation as opposed to actually being real. Man, that's really interesting. That's really interesting.
And I think that's the appeal of the conspiracy stuff that's so popular right now, like Ian Carroll, whatever. I'm going to be the pioneer on behalf of all of you.
Right.
And I'm going to investigate all of these things. And I'm going to tell you what's going on so you don't have to go find out, because you can't do it yourself. So I'm going to be pioneering for you.
Yeah. Which is not to say that we need to eschew the idea of scouts, and I think about pioneering, obviously, with my heritage, with my people were the actual American pioneers that got pushed out west and everything else. I have a very close relationship with that word. And that doesn't mean that there weren't scouts. There weren't people that didn't go out ahead, but there were still plenty of people that took a lot of risk moving out west in hand carts and ox-drawn wagons and things like that. And it is a little too easy in our very live in our brain, screen-based, intellectualized, philosophized, non-physical world to turn our scouts into what our prophets or our gurus
Yeah.
and not actually have to follow suit.
I think of it in terms of, yes, scouts is a real thing. I think of it as in a era that starved for fathers,
Mm-hmm.
into that vacuum step a whole bunch of older brothers, like
Mm-hmm.
Lord of the Flies. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like all the
Or
fathers,
gang
all the
culture or whatever else. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
so an older brother comes in. An older brother has sort of like a bullying mentality. I'll fight for you, but I'm going to bully you a little bit as well, because kind of the relationship between older brothers. And that's a very different feeling than the one who wants to guide or is exploring because he likes to explore. I'm going to do this for you, but I want something from you in exchange, as opposed to this is my calling to go explore this, and I'm happiest when I'm doing that.
Right.
There's a very different feeling there.
Yeah. And I think sadly, so many of these men resonate with that older brother approach because, well, my attitude on this is that the the physical casualties of the two great wars were absolute atrocities, but the worst thing that came out of it were the spiritual and emotional casualties that just wiped out an entire generation of healthy men,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
right? And those men did the best they could. That is by no means throwing shade or casting aspersions on these men who were broken psychologically in some of the worst ways imaginable. And it manifested in there not being a lot of good paternal energy or approaches for now multiple generations. And we're
Yeah.
left with this older brother attacked or just the complete abandonment of masculinity in general.
This is literally what I was talking about on the podcast I was a guest on yesterday. The same one we talked about
Awesome.
your style coaching. It's like, look back on, look at the world from the position of like 1950.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at World War I, which they called at the time the war to end our wars.
Right.
Right. We don't know much about World War I today, but it was horrible on a scale like gas and trenches.
Insane.
Crazy,
Yeah.
right? And then on the heels of that, you have the Great Depression, people living in shanty towns in New York City. You have the Dust Bowl, people starving to death. And then you have World War II, the atomic bomb, and all the horrors of World War II.
Right.
So yeah, from the perspective of like 1950, it's like you have a generation of men who were, a generation of men who are becoming fathers, who in their living memory, they remember World War II because they fought in it. They remember the Great Depression because they lived through it.
Grew up in it. Yeah.
They grew up, and their fathers probably fought in World War I.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, they're not going to have a whole lot of fatherly presence available because they're struggling with their own demons, the things that they're haunted with the things that they saw. And so, yeah, they're not going to be able to be available for a baby boomer generation, that is more comfortable and more coddled than any generation in human history. And so the baby boomers grow up hating their John Wayne dads. Like, your John Wayne dad was doing the best that he could.
Absolutely. Well, and especially because I wonder how much of it was that they almost felt like, look, I'm doing okay because of this material abundance that I've created.
Yes.
And so it was a way to kind of focus on that and to not have to continue to dig deeper and reflect on more of the pain and everything else. Because I wonder how much of it was almost a shadow of like, if we can pull out of all of these awful decades from a material perspective, then that is indicative of the fact that we also pulled out of them from a spiritual or an emotional or a societal or a psychological perspective as well, which almost makes me wonder if that's why people get so hyper focused on, well, the world is better than it's ever been because of XYZ technological or economic marker. And we so quickly just focus on, well, TVs are cheaper than they've ever been. And so the world is better than it was 80 years ago. And it's like, well, no, there are more ways to measure the health of a society than just technologies and economies. But those are a lot scarier to have to confront because green line doesn't always go up.
That's right. That's right. I'm thinking about, it would be really easy to understand how men of the greatest generation would be like, okay, so it's 1955. I've got a comfortable office job. We've got the suburban house, and everything's happy. World's at peace. Maybe the Korean War is kind of happening, but like things are good. We made it.
You did it. You arrived. Like, you did it.
But no focus on spiritual health at all. because
Right.
it was during the 1950s that the seeds of the cultural decay of the 1970s and 60s and 70s was planted. That was all
Mhm.
planted in the 50s, and
Right.
that all took root quite heavily, which is why we don't look at it much today. But like, yeah, there was a lack of focus on spiritual health because there was an overt focus on material health.
Mhm.
And so now you have an older generation that still thinks that way. It's like, look, we got all this stuff. It's like, well, you can see that inside there's a rotting going on. So maybe that has been passed down as well.
I think so. Yeah. Where it is, it's just as long as I have more stuff, then society's doing okay because it's a lot scarier to look at the alternative.
The alternative that have a society where I would have less stuff.
Yeah. Or even that a society may have a lot of stuff, but it's not a good, healthy society.
That's right. Yeah, people get into that to talk about like illegal immigration. Like, okay, if you round up and kicked out all the illegal immigrants and you start paying, regular American wages, what would that do to the price of everything? The Bitcoin
Right.
guys talk a lot about that.
Yeah. And it's like, yeah, I mean, that's real. And there are real prices to that. And it doesn't mean that it's not worth doing,
Oh, sure,
or
absolutely.
if you could go back to this is a conversation I have with my friends all the time where it's like, if you had to go back to the technological levels or even like medicinal levels or things like that of a particular point in history, but you also got to go back to the level of like social cohesion or social trust, where would you go? Would you do the 90s? Would you do the 80s? Would you do the 1890s? Like, where's the trade-off as far as like how much physical, economic, technological progress you're willing to cede? And, obviously the assumption is that those two are, there's an inverse relationship,
Right.
and that's obviously not the case. But it's an interesting thought experiment. And I think what underlies it is that a lot of people are willing to tackle it because we see kind of an inverse correlation between how abundant in resources we are, but how starved for spiritual and emotional and social, like societal health we are at the same time.
I like how you said social cohesion, because I think that explains why people look at the 80s. They're like, look, this was a time of material prosperity. It was like the explosion of Chinese
Mhm.
junk in the American economy, whatever. And there was very socially cohesive, even though it wasn't that at all. And
Right.
and you can easily run down that path. And you're like, well, who had high material prosperity and a high social cohesion? Nazi Germany,
Right.
or the Roman Empire. And that
Right.
explains and those were, excuse me, huge themes of the Manosphere, not necessarily Nazi Germany, but like
Right.
the Roman Empire, Return. Remember that? Return with the
Mhm.
V?
Yep.
Oh my God.
Absolutely.
And that's what they were hoping for, is sort of material prosperity and social cohesion.
Yeah. And I don't think either of those in and of themselves are problems. Not at all. But I think that what happens is, and I use this one a lot too, where X is a false god, not like
Yeah.
X the site, but that's another
Oh,
one
okay.
of the memes of mine. But I think the problem that most of us fall into is that it's not that we have like our hierarchy of the things that we value the most. And the problem is not that things don't belong in the hierarchy, because material prosperity deserves a place in the hierarchy and
Mm-hmm.
social cohesion deserves a place in the hierarchy. But when we place them in the wrong position and we place them too high up, is when things become false gods, and that's when they become problems. It's when we're too willing to sacrifice other things that should be maintained or actually deserve a higher position in that hierarchy, that's where we run into issues. And so this is what we've seen is, you've seen with both the manosphere and feminism, we saw connection and humility placed lower than autonomy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or we've seen this with a lot of just
Mm-hmm.
Western culture in the 20th century, is we saw, you know, economic and technological growth at the expense of social cohesion or spiritual growth. And again, none of these things are wrong or problems in and of themselves, but it's when we prioritize the wrong things in the wrong places and we sacrifice the wrong things for the other things.
I think that's a really good way of looking at it, because I think we can understand this moment as what are the idols that people are worshiping?
Mhm.
Unchecked economic growth was the idol of the second half of the 20th century. There are many. There's a book called Idols for Destruction that I read last year that was excellent. That's like,
Mhm.
wow, we are a crazy idolatrous nation. So,
Totally.
but unchecked economic growth, and now it's almost like there's another idol. Like it's almost like social cohesion is probably a good way of phrasing it.
Mhm.
I want a society that hangs together that I feel like I can be a part of. That's become an idol in and of itself, where it's like, okay, I'm even willing to sacrifice my civil liberties, or I'm willing to sacrifice people's lives to create that sense of social cohesion. But that also will not deliver satisfaction.
Right. And I think the other thing that makes it really scary is that we get these idols that are pitted against each other.
Mm.
And that can create this kind of fever pitch of you have to choose one or the other, because we do have this one idol of social cohesion, but then on the other side we have this like hyper individualism, and
Mm.
those can contradict each other in very real ways. And so if you're not willing to, I'm totally pro social cohesion, or I'm totally pro hyper individualism, or I'm totally moderate and trying, like, it requires so much ability to hold tension to be able to say, no, there are elements of social cohesion that are worth sacrificing for. And there are elements of individualism that are worth sacrificing for. And we need to find a way to hold on to the best of both of these things, as opposed to just like, it's Solomon splitting the baby in half. That's not
Mhm.
the solution. It's being able to find what's worth holding on to in both of those and putting them in the right places in the hierarchy.
And that's what I always thought was the best about the conversation about masculinity. At its best moments, men would reach points like this where you recognize, no, it's not about either or. Like somehow we have to find a way to chart a path through the middle, and maybe the middle towards one side or towards the other, but there still is a middle ground. And we know when we've crossed the line and become more extreme because we're
Right.
willing to sacrifice too much. And that was what always appealed to me about the conversation, because it highlighted what a challenge being a man is and has always been. And are we up for that challenge versus, no, I'm going to take the path of my flesh and I'm going to go what's most satisfying in terms of a perspective that gives voice to my anger, gives vent
Yes.
to my bitterness, as opposed to, no, like being a man is a higher calling than that.
It is. And again, because you and I are who we are and who your audience is, we can talk about this in a way. I love the beauty of Christ in that, because
Mm.
Christ is the Alpha and the Omega. He's not M or whatever the middle letter in the alphabet is.
Right.
And he's not just Alpha or just Omega. And he's perfect justice and he's perfect mercy. And it's the ability to embody all of it, as opposed to just go one extreme to the exclusion of the other, or vice versa, or just play it safe in the middle of the road.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like those are kind of these three alternatives that we're presented with: is you have to be this extreme, that extreme, or extremely milquetoast. And the real trick of masculinity is being able to embody as much of the full spectrum as you can. And that's why I love so much of what the Manosphere was, because it embraced so many good things that were left out of the conversation of what masculinity was and should be. That's why I had no problem going into a lot of the spaces that a lot of the Manosphere resents, where I would go into a lot of this more kind of like therapy, or some of these other kind of like softer, more self-development spaces. And there are problems in both sides, but there are strengths in both sides. And so I love that idea of those contraries, and to truly emulate Christ is to be as, even if we can't embody Alpha and Omega, to recognize that he can perfectly embody Alpha and Omega, and to not think that we always have to choose one or the other, or choose nothing at all.
That's right. And the constant reminder, like, you ain't the guy.
Yeah.
Oh no, that's the humility part, right? It's like,
Yes.
hey, however cool that you think you are, you ain't Jesus.
Right.
You're probably not going to start something as big as Abraham, right? You're
No.
probably not going to lead as many people as Moses. You're probably not going to be as wise as Solomon or a king
Right.
like David. Like, to see yourself reflected in the stories of these great men, and have some humility and have some gratitude to be part of the story,
Yes.
instead of thinking that you are the Ubermensch,
Right.
you are the end of history man, like from Nietzsche.
Right. Yeah. And I love, even again, that beauty of like, there's sovereign humility, because you do want to be the Ubermensch in your own story. You want to be the main character in your own story, but you want to have the humility to recognize that it's your story. You're not the main character in anybody else's story.
Yes. Yes, that's right. And you should be the main character in your story,
Hmm.
right? Maybe Jesus should be the main character in your story in a manner of
There.
speaking,
Yes.
right? But in terms of your life, you are the main character of your story. Not that there aren't really important other supporting characters. Not that you don't have co-stars in your
Right.
story, right?
Right.
But to understand that there is a degree of sovereignty that we're called to exercise over our lives,
Hmm.
over our circumstances, on behalf of our families, in the perspective of humility, and that's okay. And you can do that without going crazy in one direction or the other.
Exactly. And then still have the humility to grant people sovereignty in their own lives.
Amen. Amen. All right, so I want to bring this back around again to how this ties into men's style. No, but honestly, like I do think it matters,
Yeah.
because it's great to talk about these big philosophical concepts, and we should, and men should, and there is still a point where it's like, hey, we have to land this in our lives,
Hmm.
and the first way that there are many ways that it lands in our lives, but in terms of other people's interactions with us, the first way that we land for them is always our physical appearance.
Yeah.
Right? They don't see us as disembodied spirits,
No.
as good people. They see who we are on the outside, and in a sense, the way that we dress, the way that we present ourselves, is a way of expressing sovereignty or not. And
Absolutely.
it could choose the course of our lives in some circumstances.
Absolutely. And that's, I do think this is a great way to tie everything back in because, we talked before about the uniform of apathy or the uniform of indifference,
Mhm.
and it is an anti-sovereign uniform. It
Mhm.
is one that is basically saying that I have so little sovereignty in my own life, so little responsibility for my own life that I would rather blend in and not even register
Mhm.
than be willing to take the risks and the responsibilities and the rewards that come from actually just manifest. And that's one of the best things. And you get this now because you've worked with me on a different level that when you put on clothes every day, most guys, when they put on clothes every day, it's as automatic as brushing your teeth. You don't think about it. You just know that you have to do it.
Mhm.
When you get dressed every day, you are putting on your sovereignty every day. And it's
Mhm.
either something that reinforces that or it's something that undermines that.
And it's something that I can grow and develop in as well. Like, I don't dress the same way that I did a few years ago.
Right.
I make changes because it is a way for me to assert, like, and I'm on camera,
Hmm.
so the way that I dress matters. Like, how am I going to present myself when I'm talking to, really professionally, politically accomplished, people that have made impacts in the world versus how am I talking to someone who works on a smaller scale? Well,
Yep.
how do I put myself together in a way that is able to meet both of those as I chart my own course, through YouTube in a sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Excellent, man. Well, I continue to be grateful. Oh, before I forget,
Yeah.
I have to say thank you, because as a result of the style coaching that we did, I got to get dressed for my wedding.
Yeah, dude. Isn't
Yeah.
that so fun?
And that was amazing because I got to say the kind of suit that I wanted, the colors that I wanted, the cut, and all of that. And I got to look exactly the way that I wanted to look on my wedding, such
Yes.
that people complimented me all throughout the day, which was an amazing feeling. So there's nothing
And tell
better
me
than
it
that.
didn't just help you feel more confident, more present, more like celebratory. There's no self-consciousness about was this the right thing or like you just got to be fully immersed in the experience as a result of that, right?
That's right. Oh yeah, I got to pick a color suit. I went with a mid blue suit with a rust colored tie. And what really did it was, like, I looked at it, I was like, okay, and it went to Suit Supply. Also, the tie came from, I think, tie bar online, I think is
Oh,
where
okay. Yeah.
no,
Mhm.
I went to a men's store here that had, I wanted to see it in person. But I felt that the suit itself wasn't enough, so I went and I got a vest. And I got a
Oh, cool.
vest that was just slightly darker than the suit itself, and the whole thing just like came together so well. And so it's like I got to
Awesome.
feel comfortable all day knowing that I looked good, and that, like, I looked good standing next to my bride, who looked
Yep.
incredible.
Yes. Dude, I love it. Good. I'm so glad that worked out that way. That's fantastic.
Very much so. So thank you for all that
You're
you've given
welcome.
me over the years to make that possible.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, if men want to create similar transformations for themselves, where can they go to find out more about what you do?
Okay, so the best places to interact with me are on X and Instagram, and it's at Tanner Guzy, which is TANNERGUZY. You can learn more about my coaching and my approach to stuff if you go to masculine-style com. And then if you want really like a good 50,000 foot view on kind of what the ethos and the approach is, then go check out The Appearance of Power. It's on Amazon, it's on Audible. You can get it really kind of anywhere at this point. So yeah.
Are you going to do a second edition of the book?
I don't think I need to, which is actually kind of fun. I'm 8 years in. I may do an updated version that inserts another couple of chapters. I know I've got another book in me, but it's not necessarily style related, but we'll see what that ends up being in the future. Yeah.
All right. I look forward to it.
Yeah.
All right, brother. Well, it's great to reconnect with you again after 5 years. Thanks for starting the journey. And I think in this conversation, everyone will understand what a blessing it's been to talk with you and why you were the perfect guest to start off my podcast. So thank you.
Thanks, Will. Such a pleasure, man.